Welcome to Red Deer Public Library's Travel Memories program for November. My name's Priscilla, and I'm part of the programming staff here at Red Deer Public Library. Travel Memory exists because wonderful people who are willing to share their travels and photographs, and today our presenter is Joe Chowaniec. But before we start, I would just like to say that as part of my journey in reconciliation, I acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories, and of the Métis of Region 3, traditional and customary lands of First Nations and Métis people. So, welcome, Joe. I'd like to tell you all a little bit about Joe. He's an executive director of the Environmental Services Association of Alberta. He's an avid traveler who loves spending time outdoors with nature, and I understand that pretty much wherever he goes, he has his camera with him. His photography has been published online and in print by the Calgary Herald, Times of London, The Guardian, and the London Sun, just to name a few, and currently has a photographic exhibit at RAM, the Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton, and it's on there until January 9th, 2022, so that's all great. If you have questions or comments, you can share them in the comment section of the Facebook Live, and I will ask Joe those at the end. So I turn the program over to you, Joe. Welcome.
Thank you, Priscilla. And thank you to the Red Deer Public Library for having me this afternoon and hosting this webinar. So I'm going to flip off this slide. Let me just tell you quickly about this slide. This is the remains of part of the Dodds family coal mine in eastern central Alberta, which is now a golf course called Coal Creek. This is part of the processing facility, and as part of the golf course build, they left some of the mine buildings, and this is some of the stuff you'll see when you're golfing at that golf course. So today's presentation I've broken into two parts. Part one looks at some of the pictures in the book, and then part two is a look at where this journey is taking me. So who am I? I was born in Winnipeg. I grew up in Fort McMurray, all the way basically from 1974 to 87. Went to university at the University of Alberta, have a physics degree and an electrical engineering degree, and I am currently the executive director at the Environmental Services Association of Alberta. And as Priscilla mentioned, travel, food, science fiction, photography are my hobbies, though there hasn't been a lot of travel lately. My relatives arrived in Canada around 1900 from Poland and were sent out to Saskatchewan to make a living. This photo was taken shortly after they built their sod house in Saskatchewan, and as they waited out their first winter. And as you can see, I think they built their moonshine still before they built the sod house. My grandfather, Joseph, is the young fellow holding the dog by his ears. So some of my tools of my trade, I carry a couple camera bodies, my iPhone for photos as well as communication in case I'm somewhere I need help. A bunch of different lenses, tripod. I used to have a drone. It's crashed and beyond repair, so maybe get another one at some point. Camera filters, and very importantly, extra batteries and extra memory cards, and then some different types of lights that I use, and the first aid kit. So when I started taking these photos of abandoned buildings, my wife and a few friends suggested that I start sharing them on Facebook, so I created a page called Abandoned Alberta and started sharing, thinking that only a few people would end up liking the photos, and I would just continue to post them. And I'd hoped that one day, maybe when I retired, I would maybe do a book that was crowdsourced or print on demand through Amazon or something like that. But in December of 2018, I believe it was, a publisher reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in doing a book. At first, I ignored their email thinking it was spam, because from my research, publishers don't usually reach out to people, but they followed up, and one thing led to another, and we started down the path of creating Abandoned Alberta, the book. So we narrowed down over 1,000 photos down to the 136 that are in the first book. And the image on the cover of the book, which you can see there, is the Nickerson House, built in the 20s, if I remember correctly, from a family from Nova Scotia. This photo was captured in January 2020 near Camrose. And when I went back in April, it had finally given in to gravity and it had collapsed. The book was released in September 2020. So as I travel around the province of Alberta, either for work or vacation, and never on the main roads, I began to notice the abandoned homes and farms in the fields. It's not like they weren't there before. It's just that for whatever reason, my wandering mind started to notice them. At first, I would stop and look at the buildings and wonder what is its story? Where did the people go and why did they leave? In December 2016, I brought my camera along for one of my drives and saw through the viewfinders a glimpse into the past. As my shutter clicked and clicked again, this journey began. While in many cases there are no stories and only the fading memories of families that have long since moved on, a few have other stories, and some longer than others. Alberta has a relatively short but rich history. Alberta became a province in 1905, but its history starts long before that. Originally, the First Nations people populated the prairies, also known as Turtle Island. The first immigrants from French Canada arrived in 1870s, followed by the Methodists from Ontario, and in the early 1880s, settlers from the Utah area began arriving in 1887. Shortly thereafter, settlers began arriving from Europe and the Scandinavian countries. As I was pondering the structure of the book and the path of my erratic journeys around Alberta, I remember there were many days that my wife, Rami, would ask me where I was headed. I would respond with whichever way the car decided to go. Since December 2016, I have covered over 10,000 kilometers of highways, range roads, and township roads, scouring the countryside for photographic opportunities. Some days I would easily cover 800 kilometers in a day and then come back with no photos. Other trips would be a gold mine of photographs. In the end, I decided to showcase Alberta's abandoned history in the same erratic way I traveled the province. As you turn the pages in the book, wander the museum exhibit, or visit my Facebook page, you never know what image you might see next. No photos were staged, all are taken as is, and the property was always respected. Only photos were taken and nothing removed or damaged. Also, abandoned does not mean that there is no owner to the property or building, just that it has sat empty and neglected. If you're out exploring, please be respectful and careful. So enjoy the journey through abandoned Alberta. This is the St. Michael's Hungarian Catholic Church in the, I believe, Bashaw area. When I came across this church, I'd heard about it and heard that it'd been scheduled for demolition. And that was about 4 or 5 years ago. And to this day, it's still standing. So I don't know what the plans were. I don't know if they were going to try to restore it. I was recently there this spring and it's in really bad shape. So I don't think restoring it's going to happen, but it's kind of an interesting history. Has no bell tower. It was struck twice by lightning and has, they just ended up putting up a metal cross. So a beautiful old home in near Hannah. Some believe it could have been possibly a kit home or from Eaton's or Sears, which back in the day, you can find them online if you search for them. Eaton's had an extensive 1,200, 600 page catalog of homes, and you could customize everything and it would be shipped out to you in containers and you'd build your house. So this is just one example of a home. I believe this is the Lund family home. This is the Padola Community Hall. Probably was in its heyday from listening to the stories that people have told me, was quite the busy place, even into the early 90s. But in the short 20 to 30 years since it closed, it's sure gone downhill. So it was in the Polish/Ukrainian portion of eastern Alberta. This is a beautiful old barn in southern Alberta, Trochu area. This photo was taken with a drone. So probably back in the day, they built their home and then they'd start working right away on their farming buildings. And I believe, unfortunately, someone told me this barn might have been, is no longer around as a subject of a possible arson. The once giants of the prairies, the grain elevators. This is on the Alberta-Saskatchewan border at Buttes. One of the first things when you drive into the province on that road, on that range road, is you see this grain elevator. To think of how much traffic and how many farm vehicles would have went through there delivering their crops to market back in the day, and now they're pretty much non-existent. This is the Springwater School in near, I think it's north of Hanna. It's actually on the historical register. It's an entire stone one-room schoolhouse. So the outside is completely stone. The inside has been somewhat restored by the locals in a community group, but it sits in the condition it is right now as you see it. That's how it looked the day I walked in. The desk seems to move around as people visit. All the red books on the stage and in the cabinets are all National Geographics from the 1920s. So it's a pretty impressive building, and it's pretty neat to go visit and flip through some of those magazines and leave your name on the chalkboard. It's one of my favorite shots. As I was driving, I literally stopped and had to turn around and come back and take a photo of this beautiful old car parked in a field, and from the knoll in the background, it looks like it was literally driven across the fields and just parked there one day, and it just called out for a picture. They don't build vehicles like that anymore. When I came across this scene, it's 3 ball diamonds east of Edmonton. Hadn't been used in a number of years, as you can tell. It reminded me of Edmonton-born author W.P. Kinsella's Shoeless Joe novel, and thought of Field of Dreams. And I've heard stories of the number of ball tournaments that have gone on, and the crowds and the people and the vehicles, and so it would have been something to see back in the day. And the little, it's those things, those community activities seem to have slipped away from us as we've wandered through time. So that peaceful church in an area called Highlands. You can see the cemetery in the back. It sits atop of a hill near the area of New Norway. This church, unfortunately, on the right side of the building, the foundation wall and basement wall has collapsed in the last few years. So I don't think there's much time for this church left. It's probably going to collapse, and I was glad I was able to catch it on a beautiful winter day. This spot used to have a store, a school, and a post office for the local community. Just a picture of the Hover Community League, which is in the New Norway area, which was the kind of a Norwegian settlement area of Alberta. Interesting thing about this building is 1/3 of it's above ground and 2/3 of it is below ground as a community hall. No one seems to be left around that knows why it was built that way, why it has that unique design of having it underground. Don't know if it was used for cold storage, or there's been some talk maybe they played curling in the winter, as the groundwater would have definitely come into the building. So who knows, but it's just one of those interesting things that you see on the back roads of Alberta that makes you stop and wonder. This is a house in northern Alberta, the Sedlick family that asked me to come out and take some photos of their grandparents' property. The grandparents had a fire in their house in the late 80s, I believe. They didn't have insurance, so they moved away. And slowly over time, the vandals have, broken the windows and stuff like that, but the carpets turned to grass and moss, and the trees are overtaking, and nature slowly reclaiming this property. The interesting thing was the hog barn, all their furniture's moved into the hog barn, and when they opened the hog barn, it was still as pristine as the day it was. It was interesting to see and talk to the family about the history. This is the beautiful Hannah Roundhouse in Hannah. It has one of the last complete and functional turntables that's photographed in the beginning, the foreground of the picture, and the roundhouse is in the back. To the left of the roundhouse where the trees cutting off, that used to also all be roundhouse there too. So the trains would pull in the engines, and then they would turn the roundhouse, the turntable, to which bay the train would go into for repairs. The Hannah people, Sandra and Hannah, has been very kind to let me in and photograph the building. And over the last few years, they've made lots of progress in restoring this, and hope to eventually get it open to the public for tours and revisit some of the history of the golden days of trains. So this is quite the spot. If you're ever down there and you see someone working there, I'm sure they'd be happy to see you and tell you more about the building. But it's one of those unique things that are left in the province. This is the view from the top of the Atlas coal mine in Drumheller, one of the old abandoned coal mines that was in the Drumheller area. You can sign up for pay and go on tours of. You can actually walk up inside this ramp and go partly into the mine, but not very far, and learn all about the coal mining history, which was very important to that area back in the day. And so this is just one of the unique structures that they've, it's abandoned but been restored, and it's very. If you're down in that area, there's lots of little historical spots to stop and visit. One of my favorite spots to visit, I was just there a couple of weeks ago, and I have a video on my Facebook page of a walkthrough of the whole site. This is the town of Lower Bankhead, which a lot of people don't know exists. If you're in Banff and you head out to Lake Minnewanka, you'll see a sign that says Lower Bankhead and one that says Upper Bankhead. Lower Bankhead was the coal mining site that mined inside a Cascade Mountain, and then Upper Bankhead was the town site. Nothing really exists of the town site anymore, but the lower Lower Bankhead, will be where all the mining buildings were. And this is the lamp house where the miners would get their lamplight tickets before they went into the mine. And a lot of the remains of the foundations and support mechanisms for some of the big, huge buildings are still standing here. You can walk on the coal piles. Interesting story. My wife and I were when we were just there recently. We were looking for back in the day, the Chinese immigrants that worked there weren't allowed to live in the town, so they lived in a shanty town behind the coal slag piles. And on the slack piles is rhubarb growing in some spots, and that's from back 80 years ago, 80 to 100 years ago, when they would plant rhubarb in the coal slack. So it's always a great place. It's free to wander around, check it out. If you do Upper Bankhead, there's a trail called the Cirque Level Trail that takes you high up Cascade Mountain, and as you go up, you pass another lamp house building that's partway up the mountain, and some open shafts that are fenced off that go down into the mountain for the coal. This is in Nordegg, so just straight west of Red Deer. They were kind enough to give me a tour of all the old buildings and let me fly my drone to get some aerial pictures of the old abandoned coal mine. So this is just, you can see the giant coal pile or what was unused, some of the buildings that are remaining. When it shut down as a mine, the province used it as a prison for a short period of time. And also one of the stories and is all the wild horses that you see in the Nordegg area when you travel that highway. Some are descendants of the mining horses that were used in the mining operations back in the day. And they were, when they were, instead of killing the horses, they just released them into the wild. And those are some of the descendants that you still see now. So hopefully when COVID's over and they get back up and running, they have a couple times a week in the summer, they have tours of some of the old coal buildings and some of the old the women's house and the warehouse and stuff like that. It's a pretty cool tour to go on if you're out exploring. There's so much to see in this province. One of my favorite places to visit, a family west of Edmonton asked me to come out and photograph their property. When I got there, I was amazed at what I found. They ran an international harvester dealership until the 60s. They actually still have 1,000 acres of land, and they still farm it and rent out the land, and it's farmed. But this is the shop, the parts room at the international harvester dealership, untouched like the day when they left. And it's so cool to just explore and look through all the bins and drawers and all the catalogs and books. So it's one of my favorite spots to visit. Just leave that up there for just part of the reason I take my camera everywhere with me is truly believe it's my passport to explore the world. So that's some of the photos that are in the book. And the next part, where's this journey going? And what's in store? And as Priscilla mentioned, out of this came the exhibit at the Royal Alberta Museum. It's free. If you're going to be in Edmonton, go to the museum, walk in the front door and go up the set of stairs, and the exhibit's right there. You don't even need to pay. So it's their new community gallery that they're opening, and I'm honored to be the first person in it. And it's there until January 9th. So this is an abandoned school, completely getting overgrown by trees. One of many, many schools that are around the province or school markers. So these are some of the photos that I'm showing you next that will be featured in volume 2 of Abandoned Alberta, which will come out in September of 2023. So far this summer alone, I've traveled over 6,000 kilometers of Alberta's back roads. So this is another spot that's on the Alberta Historic Registry. You can find it. You need an eagle eye to spot it when the hay fields are high. I was lucky enough to find it in the fall. This is what's known as one man's castle or the Sunny Slope Shelter. So immigrant family arrived. The man built a underground room with this door and arch that goes down a set of stairs into this one room that's maybe 12 by 12, 14 by 14. It has a stack hole where the chimney used to go for the wood stove, and that's where they waited out the first winter. And I suspect they used it as storage, cold storage from there on in. So anyone can go visit it. The farmer that asked the land just asked that you don't walk across the crops. There's a trail to it from a side road. So it's a pretty cool spot to go visit, and to think that that's how someone survived a cold, harsh winter in Alberta. This is thought to be one of Alberta's biggest mansions from back in the day. It's just a huge, huge house. I don't have a lot of other history on it, and I'm trying to find some. It's just to think of the size of that house and how spectacular that would have been on the day overlooking the prairies. This is in the town of Manyberries, very often photographed. It's just a truck marking where the country store at Manyberries, held together by barrels of wine, twine, and wire. It's just a cool spot. Old vehicle in northern Alberta has seen much better days. I honestly don't know how I missed this photo on my when I was doing the cut for the first book. This was from like 2018 near Beaver Hill Lake, old home. The home's still standing and the other farm buildings have collapsed on a beautiful fall evening. This is inside an old 100-year-old home in deep southern Alberta. The Virginia creepers almost completely covered the house, and this is the view outside the window. So it's just kind of a different perspective, not always doing the same type of outside photo. Beautiful old church in northern Alberta on a gloomy summer day. The inside of the church still had silk flowers on the altar. I don't know if they'd been recently placed there. They're pretty old, but once again, a church with some history that has to be researched, but probably long since forgotten, and probably a lot of people don't know what's out there. Came across this summer on the western entrance to on a farm near Dinosaur Provincial Park. Someone had a great sense of humor. Love seeing this type of stuff. So a recent photo from inside a 100-year-old house. The ceiling part had given way, and they obviously hung their clothes by the clothespins on a wire above the wood stove when they were cooking to probably dry the clothes and warm them up. So we're just hanging there. Beautiful old barn in eastern Alberta that a family had invited me out to photograph. There's so many great barns out there. If you haven't figured out, I really love old cars. And this is just another example of another old car just left out there and parked in a field like it just stopped running and they just left it there. And let you think about this one for a minute and figure out what it is. It's an old piano. You can see the keys, you can see the hammers. It's lying on its back. It used to be standing up, but it's outside an old abandoned monastery in northern Alberta. So it was a very simple life. Looking at the property, there's not much left of the buildings, but there was a monastery on the north of North Saskatchewan River in northeastern Alberta. And why this piano is where it is, it's a mystery, but it's been stripped of its ivory. It's just kind of a cool thing to find a piano out there. I was out photographing an old church, and a local stopped, asked what I was doing, and told him what I was up to. And then he said, "Oh, by the way, if you go back up the road on the hill, you'll find an old car graveyard." So I went back up and found this car, and it reminded me of the wallflower sign, one headlight. It just looked like a really sad car. It looked like it had some personality. Still looks at its personality now, but it's pretty sad looking. An old water pump. Think back in the days, 30, 40 below, if you didn't have running water and you didn't have water, there'd be no chance of survival. So you had to keep that pump going, and there's something to be said about the way of life back then and the hardships that people endured to try to grow this province and and make it what it is. Deep southern Alberta, came across this scene. It's just a truck cab on the top of a hill. Don't know anything about it, but it just caught my eye. It's abandoned. It's alone. There's a story there, but everyone can make their own story for it. But it really portrays to me being abandoned and alone and what it means. This was, I recently was on a tour with a gentleman by the name of Robert Scott, who runs abandoned photo tours. He's out of Calgary, and he has permission to go to numerous properties and take people in small groups on photo tours. So I did one recently with him on for 2 days down in the Oyen area, and this was one of the houses that we went to. Kind of think of these work boots, what's left of them, and this is where they sat in the corner of the front entrance, and you think of all the miles that they must have walked in this 100-year-old house and out in the farm and everything like that. So that was kind of a poignant photo and moment. This is a 100-plus-year-old house. It was built in 1914. It had two, you can only see one in the photo. It had two fireplaces, two chimneys. That's how big it was. This was on one of those perfect moonless nights back in, when did we do this? September. Milky Way. There's a light on in the window that Robert Scott had put lights inside the house, and then we lit the scene externally with his drone, so it's got a floodlight, and we flooded the light so you get the building and the Milky Way. So think about those cold winter nights and the beauty of looking out on those stars with no light pollution. It had been pretty spectacular. So this is one of the quotes that I think about often when I'm looking at some of these old houses, that old houses are full with memories, and that's why they resist to collapse. And nothing's more true of this house. She's buckling, you can see in the middle, the foundation's giving way. Built in 1910. Just waiting as we sat and waited for the sunset. It's quite the, sit there and think about days gone by and the thing, just the history. There's a couple other houses that I haven't shown in here. That there was one house that we visited that the family had built. It was in the 30s. The beautiful home, probably the size of this one. Spring came and they decided no, they couldn't do it, and they left and went back to the States, and the house was never lived in, and it still stands there today. They couldn't put up with the winters. Then when spring and summer came, it was the grasshoppers, the plagues, and the drought, and they just decided to leave. So with that, Priscilla, I think that was a little shorter than I said. I spoke a little quick, but I want to thank everyone again for listening and taking the time to join us today. There's my website, my Facebook page, my Twitter handle, which a lot of people say is the best Twitter handle ever because it's pretty true, and my Instagram page. And I know the Red Deer Library has a copy of the book. Again, the museum, also chapters, online, and any bookstores where you pick up books.
Yes, it's a great book.
Thanks. It's 140 pages and 136 photos. So check it out. It's I'm pretty proud of how well it's done. So thanks again for this.
Okay, well, I have a few questions.
Okay.
So their story about your publisher is really great, how you ended up getting published by a maritime publisher. Yep,
Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, and the book's printed in, can't remember the name of the town, but just outside of Winnipeg right now.
And you talked about your equipment, and did you use the drone quite a bit?
I used to, and then we were using my wife and I were on our trip this summer doing some work, and I was photographing something, and a gust of wind came and it slammed it into a tree, and that was the end of the drone. So I'm in the market for a new drone, but I can't afford one right now. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but they do not like strong wind gusts. But I had all this planned out. I was going to do this great video of the Hannah Roundhouse for them, kind of coming down the tracks and the Hannah Roundhouse appearing, but a tree got in the way. And it was beyond repair, and the company that I bought the drone from, they don't make parts for it anymore, so it's kind of sad.
Well, and I think it's getting more difficult to use the drone I guess not in rural areas, but.
It still is. There's lots of rules, and I went through the process and got my. You have to get not a pilot's license, but you have to get a license to use it. You have to pass the test and insurance. So I mean, I'd gone through all that hassle finally and got it all set up, and then these things happen with drones, right?
Yeah,
so
that's life.
Yep, that is cost of business.
So the research for where you go, I mean, you started out just sort of stumbling on places when you were out traveling, but now is it just social media that's helping you find places, or?
Yeah, a lot of people will contact me on my Facebook page, and I encourage people to do so if they have a property that's theirs, that's in their family, that has a history, it has some really cool things on it. I'm more than happy to come out and photograph it. A lot of times I'll give people the digital files they can use, or a print or something for the time. And as I was mentioning to you beforehand, I'll take one or two photos. Sometimes I end up spending a lot more time talking to the people and learning. I find it so fascinating. I didn't include it in the slides, but I was out during the pandemic, out of a town I won't name because it's very distinct what the barn is, but the lady asked me if I want to come out and photograph the barn, and I said sure, and we went inside and I photographed a box inside there, and I got home and it was really dark, and I cleaned up the image and lightened up because I wanted to see what was written on it, and I phoned her and said, you might want to go back to the barn and get that out of there. And it was a 1903 Norwegian wedding chest, and it was family, and she found two more in the building, so she's getting them restored, and they were going to bring down the barn this year. And turns out the family was the family that gave the land to that where Camrose sits now. So the family that owned this land, that where this town was and this barn was, ended up giving land that started what is now where Camrose is. So it's kind of cool just to hear those kind of neat stories. Yes. And I really appreciate tips that people give me and invite me out.
So today with the industrial farming that we have, right? Huge farms with big equipment and all that sort of thing. Generally, they wouldn't be going around these old buildings and whatnot. So that is something that's vanishing quickly, I imagine.
Yeah, I think there may be a few spots where they might go around them, but I think if there's an inch of land that people can use, and if it's not in a family and it's industrial land for farming, they're probably plowing them down and taking advantage of growing crops or grazing cattle on them, which is sad, because those are people's memories. And and a lot of times when I ask people why is that house still there, and they're like, we just can't get rid of it. We don't, there's just so much family memories in it. And then there's others where people have leased the land from someone who's leased it from someone and to raise cattle on it, and they're like, it's not mine to get rid of. I wouldn't, I would feel wrong getting rid of it, right? So they just slowly let nature take its course, and the building falls.
Do you have a favorite location?
That's a hard one. Some of my favorite spots are sometimes it'll be where I am that day, and it just happens to be that. I really do like the Bankhead one. I do like, I didn't show it in here, but not far from Red Deer is Big Valley, and the remains of the Roundhouse there, which is just, I call it Alberta Stonehenge because it's just this big concrete monolith of where the trains would have pulled in there for repairs. So some of those more public accessible ones that are things, but anything I find new with a lot of history, I find really interesting. But I will caution people, it isn't pleasant sometimes. And you have to be safe. I now travel, make sure I'm going with someone, because a couple of years ago, a gentleman from Saskatchewan was exploring a farm in southern Alberta and fell in a well and unfortunately passed away. So I mean, there's hidden dangers on these properties if no one knows what's out there. The town of Hannah just invited me down a couple weeks ago to come down and film or photograph the interior of the Seymour Hotel before it's torn down. And the Seymour Hotel has a long history in the town of over 100 years. And I had my N95 mask on. I went up to the third floor, and it was literally 3 feet thick of pigeon poop. And it's like I turned around like, nope, I can't even do this one, right? So it's like that and the asbestos and the lead, and then the critters. I don't know how many times I've been scared to death by pigeons. But it's, to me, it's, well, I just like sharing the images. And if anyone follows my Facebook page, the conversations that'll start with people remembering, going to a community hall. The one that I just showed the video, I just posted a video of the Padula Hall that I showed, that's with the curtains hanging out the window, and people talking about the parties and dances they remember going to and how lively it used to be. And just seeing people talk about the good memories with all the negativity of stuff going around, I think it's neat to share that kind of stuff.
Well, and preserve it.
Yeah, because it's going to be gone, right?
It's going quickly, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, do you prefer black and white or color? Because I
prefer black and white. The publisher wanted color. I'm hoping to have a few more black and white in the next image. I think some photos look really good in color, but I think for like the shop there, there's something about the nostalgia of the black and white, and it just, to me, it adds a level of history to it. To me, there's just something black and white. I like doing landscapes in black and white. There's just something about black and white.
And the winter photography too, where there's the snow as the background too. It's
hard in the winter with the snow and then the blue sky, the contrast and the lighting. But it also says something about being harsh climate, surviving. I often talk about some of these buildings that you see, like these houses that are 100 years old. I'm pretty sure that the house I'm living in now in Edmonton will not be standing in 100 years. I can't imagine the workmanship and construction that goes into these buildings, and the labor of love that people must have put into building them. Like they're so square and perfect. And there's a house in the book that is completely made out of mahogany. It's 100 years old. I don't even know where they got mahogany from. Where'd they get it shipped in from? And it's just like, it's perfect in every way. Even the craftsmanships of the edging and everything. It's like, it's a time gone by where people really appreciated that kind of hand labor.
The kit homes, right? The people bought homes from Eaton's and whatever. And
it's really fascinating to go try to find a kit home catalog or some of the images from them. You could order everything, and it's just to think, like the one house that I showed, like the nearest town was probably 80 kilometers away, so they would have come in by train, and then they would have dragged it by horse and buggy there, and then probably over a few weeks, the neighbors, everyone pitched in and got a family started. It's just, but that was your life savings probably in that container that would have come from Eaton's or Sears, right?
Yes. Our local museum, they had an exhibit on that a couple of years ago, and it's amazing.
Oh, on the kit homes?
Yeah.
Oh, that would have been cool. Yeah. And some of them are big kit homes. Like they're pretty massive homes, like
fancy.
2,000 square feet, fancy homes. Yeah.
So you seem to do mostly rural photography, but there's a bit of urban. Does it matter to you? Or
I'd like to do more urban. There's a couple in the book, but unfortunately, stuff gets torn down so quick that it doesn't, in Edmonton and Calgary and Red Deer, it doesn't last. Unfortunately, there's the McTaggart house in Edmonton. I tried to get permission to get in and I just wanted an exterior shot, and they wouldn't let me, and it's being torn down, and it's like this beautiful home.
Well, Well, Northlands Coliseum too, right?
Yeah, well, there's a picture of it. They wouldn't let me inside because the city didn't want people to know it's abandoned when everybody knows it's abandoned. So, and the racetrack next to it, I wanted to get pictures, and it's sad. And it's history disappearing. I think the Northlands Coliseum, where the Oilers won all those Stanley Cups, in a few years, it's going to be a flat piece of land. That history's gone, and the people 10 years from now will have no idea that ever happened there. They'll just think it happened downtown.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just lately, there's been lots of northern lights. Have you been out to get any pictures of them at all?
I tried this weekend and struck out.
Okay.
I've had no luck with northern lights in old buildings. I have tried. It's
tough like to get it.
Oh yeah, it's so fit. It could be, even though they say it's going to happen, it could happen for 15 minutes. I think the ones on the weekend finally showed up. I went out till about midnight, and the ones on Saturday showed up about 6 a.m. So I mean,
that would be a long cold wait.
Yeah, it's a long cold wait, and like I said in the book, there's a one shot of I looked for 2 years to find a picture of an owl in a building looking out. Right, it took 2 years of searching, and I literally that's an owl. Backed up and took a photo. And it's because I always see people posting pictures of owls in buildings. Because it's abandoned, but someone else is living in it now. Whether it's a skunk or an owl or porcupine, there's people living in it. I've even been in a house where there's moose living in it, right? Like there's hunker down in the evenings in the winter, right? So someone's using it.
I like your Milky Way shot though. The house is
I'm still working on getting better at those. The night photography it's not easy and it's tough, but that one turned out pretty good. We just lucked out. It was perfect moonless night and all the conditions were right.
But you've mastered the Alberta blue sky and clouds. Gosh. You have lots of beautiful shots.
Like I told you before, a lot of people don't believe those are real, but anyone that's ever been here, those are Alberta blue skies. Like today, it's it's,
and with the canola too, right? That's just
it's so Alberta, so Alberta, so Saskatchewan, right?
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned I think it's in the foreword that you wanted to thank one of your mentors. So I was just going to put a shout out for this book, which the library has in its collection too, Bear, Spirit of the Wild by Paul Nicklin.
Yeah, Paul is one of the great, not just Canadian, but U.S. Photographers known all over the world for his work in the Arctic and the Antarctic. And he's one of my mentors. He's been kind enough to, I've hired him a few times for my real job, for speaking engagements at conferences, and he's gotten to know him, and he spent time with me, giving me very constructive criticism of how to improve my work and what equipment I need and stuff like that. And then people like Brian Scarry, who, if anyone's seen the Disney thing of The Secrets of Whales, Brian's been kind enough over the years to give me advice as well. Timothy Allen, who's on the back of the book, who kindly gave an endorsement of the book and a quote, and Bill Weir from CNN, kindly enough to, help me along the journey of getting this book out, and giving me valuable advice of what to do and what to look for, because anyone can pick up a camera, but I'm always learning more each day, and I think that's important for everyone. And I hope that the book, in some way, when people, when I started even as a kid or a younger guy, my wife and I would be driving somewhere and why is that building there? Like, why isn't someone torn it down? And now to stop and think about its history and wonder what's happened of it, and where'd the people go? And I think it's important for all of us to stop, especially now, and take a moment and learn from it, right?
Totally. So you also mentioned that there's other photos from Allison Blackburn Billings, Glenn Bow, Rob Brennan, and Chris Doring. So How did that happen?
I knew there was parts of the province that I couldn't get to with the short time frame I had for the book on the first go around. So I reached out to them and asked if they'd be interested in submitting 1 or 2 photos for the book for areas of the province I couldn't get to, and let them choose the photos. I gave them each, they agreed to a copy of they got a copy of a book and in term for payment. And I just thought it was a way to also help get their work exposed, because for example, I know Chris is working on a book that'll have more text than mine does, be more stories than that, but Chris has a huge following off the beaten path with Chris and Connie on Facebook. And I just thought it was a way to, spread the wealth and help. To me, it's not about money or anything, and there's not a lot of money be made in the book world, not in Canada, and just a way to expose other people's work other than mine.
So it's a good point to mention again, what's next? You had briefly mentioned that you've got plans for a new book, but I wondered if you just want to tell us about that again.
Okay, so yeah, so the first book's out still. Still copies available here, there, and everywhere. The museum's open till January, and there is hope. Nothing's firmed up yet that the exhibit of I think there's 32 or 36 photos at the museum might travel to a couple other places in the province. We'll see when it closes. And then the publisher has reached out to me again, and we'll be doing a second book with a completely new set of photos. Some you saw today, some no one will see until the book. I'm not even posting them on my Facebook page. Keep everyone in suspense, because first time around, everyone had probably seen all the photos, but it's still, they didn't have maybe necessary story, and it's people like having a tabletop book. So that comes out in September of 2023, just in time for Christmas. And hopefully by then the pandemic is over and I can actually have a book signing this time, because I could not, sadly, when it came out this time, if I dropped off books, they were pre-signed at bookstores, and I couldn't have any public events, and I think a lot of people would have liked that. So,
well, that's great.
Yep.
We really appreciate you sharing all that with us today. And I just want to mention that we'll be back Wednesday, December 1st, and that time Travel Memories will be visiting Newfoundland, The Rock, Grossmorn National Park, Lanceau Meadows, Jig's Dinner, and Irish Loop, presented by award-winning travel writer and photographer Jerry Fian. So thank you again. A big thanks, Joe, and good luck with all your further endeavors.
Thank you.